speaker here, Dr. Andrew Gunther, who received his PhD in Energy and Resources from the University of California at Berkeley, my alma mater also, in 1987, and has worked at the intersection of environmental science and policy since 1979. He served as Assistant Chief Scientist for the Exxon Valdez Oil Spill Restoration Program and is founder and Executive Director of the nonprofit Center for Ecosystem Management and Restoration in Oakland. And he has just completed a 7-year term as the Executive Coordinator of the Bay Area Ecosystems Climate Change Consortium. The consortium was established in 2009 to assess the impact of climate change on Bay Area ecosystems and identify actions that will preserve the benefits we derive from these ecosystems in the face of ongoing climate change. He's a member of the Board of Directors of the Union of Concerned Scientists and a scientific advisor to the Alliance for Climate Education and the Regeneration Project. Since 2007, Dr. Gunther has given over 60 presentations about climate change to diverse audiences in the Bay Area and other locations. He first lectured about climate change as a graduate student at UC Berkeley in 1985. Venues where he has spoken include state and federal agencies, business and professional associations, community organizations, country clubs, churches, and synagogues, colleges, and high schools. So, a perfect person to help us with our presentation today.
So there's obviously a need to educate people in all of our communities about climate change, and giving a presentation is an incredible opportunity to do just that, because we learn by listening. Right? The human voice, when imbued with knowledge and conviction, can be an incredible teaching tool. Yet it's really easy to give a bad presentation. In fact, okay, so you guys have all seen them, right? Okay. In fact, poor presentations are so common that our expectations for presentations are actually really low. And then when you have presenters who are nervous and you have attendees who have low expectations, well, those guys tend to see that we have a problem. But luckily, it's also easy to give a good presentation. If you understand some basic concepts and you practice some basic skills, you can become a much more effective presenter, and you have a real opportunity to inspire your audience. For our purposes, you have a real opportunity to further CCL's outcomes, and also have your work for CCL be much more meaningful and engaging. So there are 3 basic topics I want to cover today: the components of a presentation, techniques for presenting, and using presentation software. So the components, there are 5 of them. First one is the topic. Do you know what you're talking about? And how interested are you in the topic? Because I can tell you, the more interested you are in the topic, the better a presentation you're going to give. If you've ever been to a presentation where the first thing out of the presenter's mouth is, "Oh, I wish Bill was here because he's the one who really knows about this topic," so you feel like standing up and saying, hey, give me a refund, right? And then what's the point? You want someone to leave your presentation thinking, hey, I just found out. What is that? And it's got to be short. You know, the saying you got to be able to explain to your grandma in 10 seconds. That's what the point is. And then the result. And the result, of course, we want people to realize climate change is a serious problem, and that fee and dividend is a real opportunity to address it. The second component is the opening. This is far and away the most important part of a presentation. Okay, you've got about 20 seconds to get people engaged. You want to see this, you don't want to see this. So how do you get this? So you have to make people, most people stand up and the first thing out of their mouth is, "Oh, hi, I'm Andrew Gunther, and I'm going to talk about giving effective presentations about climate change." But you're always introduced. So that's just repeating it. What you have to do in 20 seconds is convince the audience that they should listen to you. That's the opening. And how do you do that? You have to engage with them. You have to tell a story. You have to ask a question. You have to do something unexpected that will help open people's minds. And of course, if you think about it, if you sat in a presentation, you realize in that first moment, you make a lot of decisions as a member of the audience about whether it's worth listening to somebody. So I'm going to give you a sample of the opening statement for the presentation I give about climate change. And then I want to talk about it a little bit. Remember also that you change your opening statement depending upon your audience. Okay? So what I say is that my wife and I have 2 children. And like all parents, we want our kids to grow up in a world that's safe, healthy, and as productive as the world that our parents inherited from their grandparents. And today, I want to explain to you why it is that the world scientific community is saying that our future, and particularly our kids' future, is going to take a serious turn for the worse unless we take immediate action. But before I go any farther, let me say what I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you what to believe. And I'm not going to tell you what's right or wrong. We all have our own values we use to determine that. What I am going to tell you about is the scientific evidence that documents that we have a big problem. And in so doing, I'm going to ask that you listen to the skeptics. The real skeptics. Scientists. Objective skepticism is the heart of the scientific process. That's why it works so well. The oldest scientific society in the world, the Royal Society of London, has as its motto, don't take anybody's word for it. So, in that opening statement, a couple of things happen. First of all, I start out, the first thing out of my mouth, after being introduced as a scientist, and by the way, your introduction is actually part of your opening statement. So, if you write out an introduction and you give it to your host, 99 times out of 100, that's exactly what will be said. The other 1% can get you in big trouble. You have had a host sort of riff away on something, and then you're standing up and you're not in control of the situation. But if you write out your introduction, your host will read it, and you're coming into an absolutely perfectly laid out situation just the way you want it. So I'm introduced as a scientist. The first thing I do is say I'm a parent. And that's a way of connecting with a broad audience. But of course, if I speak at a high school, that's the last thing I would say to start with. And I also try and touch on the issues that are on people's mind, like the skeptics, right? So I'm already trying to get at the idea that I have some answers to some things that you've heard about that you need to listen to. So again, it's a hook. It's when you write a paper. We're all trained to write papers. You start with the introduction, and then you make your points, and then you have a conclusion. For a presentation, you've got to flip that all around. You start with the hook. You start with the conclusion. And then you fill in as you go. After your opening statement, there are the main points. People frequently try and make too many points. As though the more they kind of spout out, the smarter they are or something. It's hard to digest it down. And use stories. Whenever you can use stories to make your point, you're going to engage your audience more. So the cool thing is that the history of climate science is a story, and you don't have to be a scientist to tell it, right? It starts with Fourier. Fourier, when I put his picture up and I say, Fourier was a contemporary of Thomas Jefferson's, and he rode with Napoleon. These things are true, but it completely sort of opens people's brains. What? Thomas Jefferson? Napoleon? They're not expecting it. And so it really engages people. It was Fourier who first postulated that there must be a layer of heat-trapping gases in the atmosphere. And then Tyndall, so then I move on and say that Tyndall, in 1859, demonstrated in the laboratory that components of air can actually absorb heat. So this was the mechanism that Fourier had, that underlied Fourier's hypothesis. And putting Tyndall's face on the screen is just great. He is like the penultimate, 19th century scientist, right? And then I move on to Arrhenius, who actually calculated in 1896. So this is 20 years before Alfred Wegener publishes the theory of continental drift. Svante Arrhenius calculates what the temperature rise of the Earth would be if you had twice as much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. He does it just with a piece of paper and a pencil. And long Swedish nights. But the fact that he could do it with just a piece of paper and pencil shows how fundamental the issues are. So it's really easy to get this stuff off. The American Institute of Physics has a great website about the history of climate change. And people don't understand the history. They don't understand how basic the physics is. Then your presentation has a short summary where you highlight the main points, you remind people what the main points were, but that's not the end of your presentation. The end of your presentation is a closing statement. This is your chance to tell people, what you want them to do with the information you gave. A closing statement is not, "Whoa, that's my last slide. Any questions?" I mean, that's just totally dropping the ball. And for CCL, I mean, this is where you make the ask. You explain to people why it's important and why they need to be involved, what they need to do. So, and who knows what's going to happen, right? I don't see any fee and dividend signs in there. So that's the components of a presentation. And now I want to move on to talk about techniques for presenting. And, some people get very nervous, right? It can be a little intimidating to stand up and speak in front of people. But understanding some basic skills and practicing them will make it much easier. You have to think of yourself as a performing artist. And these are different skills, certainly as a scientist, these are different skills. But you need to be able to project emotion and passion. You need to know how to use your voice and how to make eye contact with your audience, use movement and humor when appropriate, and develop confidence. Let me talk about each one of these things. So often you hear people say, "Oh, if I was only like Heath, I'd be such a good presenter." No, you have to be yourself. People stand up like they have a bag over their head when they talk, right? Think of someone who's talking with their friends. They're expressive, they're moving, their voice is modulating. They get up behind a podium and they're just talking like this, or maybe they have a little face on them. So you have to be yourself when you're up talking. And sometimes it's easier said than done because you're nervous, but as you practice it, it's really important. And that's right, practice. Practice is the single most important thing to an effective presentation. You can learn about your voice. Your voice, you can get people's attention by what you do with your voice. Obviously, if you speak really loudly to make a point, people might hear, but also, if you speak more softly, people will pay attention. And if you pause, if you stop, you can see people's eyes. If you're giving a talk and you pause, and they're looking at the screen, they'll go, "Oh, look at you. What's going on? What's going on?" And so, and try not to use too many words. You also see people will make a presentation and they'll say something, then they'll say it again, and in other words, and they'll say it again. Instead of figuring out what it is, what's the key phrase you want to say it, and it's okay if you pause and let the audience think about it while you look at your notes and figure out what the next thing is that you're going to say. You don't need to fill all the space with words. Just use the right words. And eye contact is really incredible. So he creates this entire iconic character out of eye contact, right? But there's right and wrong ways to do it. You've seen these. This is Andy Goodman, who wrote a book, Why Bad Presentations Happen to Good Causes. And he describes, and you've seen these people, there's the staring at my shoes speaker, and who's like reading notes, and every so often they kind of look up just to kind of make sure like that people haven't left the room, but they don't make any connection. Then there's the scenic overlook, where someone's talking and then they look up, and then there's Sir Glancelot, right? And the lawn sprinkler, right? But none of those make any engagement with the audience. The right way to do it is one-on-one eye contact. You make a point to somebody, and then you move on and make a point to somebody else. It's like you're Superman with his heat vision, and over the course of your talk, you're going to warm up everybody in the audience. Now, it's amazing. I've given talks in an auditorium with 400 people, and I'll pick someone and I'll make a point up there in the 15th row, and they'll go, because they know I'm looking at them. You can tell, and it keeps your audience engaged. Now, there's one thing that's really important to recognize, though, which is that when you look someone in the eye, you are opening up a two-way line of communication. And you're not sure, you gotta be careful, because I was giving a talk once, and I'm making my point with Superman heat vision, and I looked, And I look at someone, and this guy, he's totally pissed off. He's like fuming. It's like I can see steam rising off his head. And so, it's very distracting. You get that kind of engagement, right? So, but I knew something was going on, and in fact, I knew his hand would shoot up when it was done, and he was going to ask me a question. But so you got to be aware of that, or you look at somebody and they're sound asleep. This happened to me once. It was my 88-year-old dad who insisted on coming to hear me talk, and 5 minutes into it, he's sound asleep. So that can be a little discombobulating. But that's really important for keeping your audience engaged, is looking people in the eye. Podiums. Everyone seems to think that a podium is what? So you put your speech down on there and you read it. I think podiums are like prison because you can't move. And I am much better speaker if I can move around. This is a great challenge to the man who's filming this, right? But it allows me to be more expressive. And so if you're going to be moving around, if you're going to escape from podium prison, as I like to say, there's 2 things you need to do. You need to ask for a wireless microphone, or at least a microphone that has a cord enough that you can move around. And then you also need one of these guys so that you can change the slides without having to march back to the computer. Because among other things, when you do that, you tip off the audience that you're about to change the slide. And you lose them. So you guys don't know when I'm going to change the slide. You know I'm going to do it. And in fact, you're kind of waiting, right? Because the slide is the punchline when I talk. It's not the introduction. I am introducing topics, and then I am changing the slide so that you can see it. Humor. Great, right? Everybody loves to laugh. But there's nothing worse than a presenter making a joke that goes bad, right? It's like, ooh, and then everyone's feeling sorry for him. And you can tell the presenter knows the joke didn't work. So how do you do this? I tell you, if you're the kind of person who can make people laugh in a regular everyday talking, you can do it in a presentation. You can also, and you've seen me do this already, you can just put a joke up on the screen and let people read it and laugh. Right? Andy Goodman says that your audience has a patience account, and they start with the account full, and as soon as you start talking, it starts draining. Okay? Now, if you make them laugh, it comes back up, and then it starts draining again. You can show them a video, it comes up really fast, right? Or cool pictures. So you have to think that way, because if the patient count drains out, then out comes the smartphone. So you can use humor that way. The thing that most people are frustrated about is that they feel they can't relax. They're very nervous. And I think it's important to realize that even really good presenters are really nervous. They just don't show it. And one of the reasons they don't show it is because they've practiced their presentation. And the more you practice it, and particularly if you practice it in front of other people, and you get their feedback, you'll suddenly figure out which parts are good and which parts aren't. Get rid of the bad parts. Then you're standing up knowing you have a presentation that people think is good. And then you are more confident, which makes you an even better presenter. Now let's move on to software, and I'm hoping that we're going to have time for questions here. So, presentation software is a real problem. We'll go through this because first of all, your slides, you don't read your presentation and you don't read your slides. People didn't come to, I've gone to presentations where the presenter spends half the time facing away from the audience, reading their slides. But the real problem with reading your slides and the problem with putting words on the screen is that people cannot read and listen at the same time. Very effective. People look and listen. But when you put words up on the screen, what happens is that your brain, you start reading and your brain's trying to figure out, is what's on the screen the same thing that's coming out of your mouth, the presenter's mouth? How many of you know the names of my children? Yeah, okay. You got to the 4th bullet on the screen, right? And it was just nonsense. It was kind of nonsense. It seemed kind of related. So, but you started reading and you stopped listening to me.
Actually, I thought those were pretty good.
Well, I didn't make it like, I didn't make it, a silly rhyme or something. But the key thing is that people look and listen. So pictures say it all. And they complement what you are saying. You can talk about the problems of climate change leading to migration, or you can show a picture like this. And that says it all. In fact, some pictures are so disturbing, you don't even want to keep them on the screen for a while. Now, you can still use words, but if you put words on a screen, you need to stop and let your audience read them. When I put this up, it's always my key to go take a drink of water. And then I repeat the red word, because this to me is the best phrase I've seen for what the scientific community is telling the world about climate change. I talk a lot about, I give talks about ecosystem restoration. There's nothing better than showing a picture of the dam and then it was removed. Right? There's no way I could use words to make that happen. But there's something that's really then fundamentally important here. You ever had someone say, oh, sorry, I couldn't get to your talk. Can you send me the PowerPoint file? Now, I contend that if you are giving a presentation effectively using presentation software, that will be absolutely useless to the person who's asked for it. Because it is not an outline written down. It is pictures and visuals that are supporting your words. I mean, let's go back here for a second. So, here's my presentation. Like, oh yeah, there was this, but actually this was all, right? Remember, that was all garbage. And then now we have no return car, people climbing their train, Winston Churchill. What's going on here, right? It doesn't make sense unless you're hearing me present. But that's what's keeping the audience engaged, right? So, I said video is really great. So I was one of the people who went in 2007 to Nashville after the Al Gore movie came out, where we did these trainings, right? And we got this video in his PowerPoint. Now, this is just like, talk about filling up the patience account, right? This is so cool, and I even can tell the story, because he was flown out from Greenland out to the Arctic ice cap, and then this corpsman takes a big broom, puts a big X and says, Mr. Vice President, come step over here. And then boom, and right up through the ice cap comes the submarine, and they get on the submarine and go tooling around under the ice. So, but having this video, I figured out, how do I do that? I figured out to talk about the fact that the Arctic ice cap is not only getting smaller, but getting thinner. And I can use this while I'm saying that, because now you can do this, the submarines can do this over more parts of the Arctic, because the ice cap is thinner. And then I gave a talk where a guy comes up to me afterwards, and it turns out he's an engineer from Lamont Doherty who refits submarines to go under the Arctic ice cap, and he had some things to tell me. Luckily, he didn't say it. He waited till afterwards to tell me about it. Themes and backgrounds and colors. Presentation software is full of 1 million of these things. And they are just distracting, in my opinion. People put their logo, you don't need your logo on every page at all. It's just, where people put pictures up. Cool picture, if you're a skier, it's a great picture. But after the 6th slide with the same picture, it gets kind of distracting. I point out too that the eye sees color, so bright colors come to the foreground. So I use colors for highlighting and dark colors for seeing. And so if you put black on white, now I'm going to flip this and tell me if you feel your eyes relax more. I always feel it. I think that white on black, because the black recedes into the background and the white jumps forward, and if you put a picture over a black background, it's much easier than using one of these colored backgrounds, or they have all these things on them.
Well, that red really fades. I think it's...
Well, no, that's right.
You need a really strong projector.
Or a really bright light. It's also very light here, too. So, Another fundamental part of presentation software that you can is to animate the flow of information on the screen. Okay? So that it's like your teacher used to draw on the blackboard, right? And when they were done, there said there was a whole diagram or something, but they introduced it piece by piece. If you put everything up at once, the audience is all involved in whatever they're looking at. They're not listening to you. So I'm going to demonstrate this for you guys now. So I'm going to give you my greenhouse effect wrap from my presentation. And first I'm going to do it without the slides being animated. And then I'll do it again with the slides animated, so you can see the difference. So the Earth gets almost all of its energy from the sun, and most of the sun's rays pass through the atmosphere, striking the planet and warming it up. And just like anything else that warms up, a log in the fireplace, a frying pan on the stove, the Earth begins to radiate heat in the form of infrared radiation. Now most of that radiation escapes out into outer space, but there is a layer of heat-trapping gases in the atmosphere that absorb some of that radiation and radiate it back down to the planet, warming it up further, and that's why the Earth has the temperature that it does. Mars has a very thin atmosphere, a very weak greenhouse effect. It's a very cold place. Venus has a very thick atmosphere, a very powerful greenhouse effect, and has a surface temperature close to that of molten lead. And it's not just because of the relative positions of the planets compared to the Sun, because Mercury, which of course is the closest planet to the Sun, has a very thin atmosphere, very weak greenhouse effect, and has a surface temperature well below that of Venus. Now, over the last 250, 300 years, humans have been adding prodigious amounts of these heat-trapping gases to the atmosphere, mainly by burning coal, oil, and natural gas. And that's had the effect of thickening that layer of heat-trapping gases. So now more of the radiation that used to escape into outer space is absorbed and pumped down to the planet, and that extra energy is what's forcing our climate to change. Okay, now I'll do it animated. The Earth gets almost all of its energy from the sun, and most of the sun's rays pass through the atmosphere, striking the planet and warming it up. And just like anything else that warms up, a log in the fireplace, a frying pan on the stove, the Earth begins to radiate heat in the form of infrared radiation. Now most of that radiation escapes into outer space, but because there's a layer of heat-trapping gases in the atmosphere, some of that is absorbed and radiated back down to the planet. And that's why the Earth has the temperature that it does. Mars has a very thin atmosphere, a very weak greenhouse effect. It's a very cold place. Whereas Venus has a very thick atmosphere, a very powerful greenhouse effect, and has a surface temperature close to that of molten lead. And it's not just because of the relative positions of the planets compared to the Sun, because Mercury, which of course is the closest planet to the Sun, has a very thin atmosphere, a very weak greenhouse effect, and has a surface temperature well below that of Venus. Now, over the last 250 or 300 years, humans have been adding prodigious amounts of these heat-trapping gases to the atmosphere, mainly by burning coal, oil, and natural gas. And that's had the effect of thickening that layer of heat-trapping gases. So now more of the radiation that used to go into outer space is actually absorbed and radiated back down to the planet, and that extra energy is what's forcing our climate to change. All right, so by animating it, you have to stay with my narration, right? And I only show you the next piece when you're ready to see it. And even though you spend the whole time looking at the screen and not looking at me, I'm narrating a video, right? And it makes it keeps you where I want you to be, so that I'm in control of the presentation. And you're not racing off. In the first one, if you noticed, while I was talking about Mars, you were looking at Mercury, right? Because you can go much faster than I speak. So I would really encourage you to animate. Now there's a way you can do this. Sometimes you have a great slide, maybe you've got this from someone, and it has too much information on it, and you want to only show parts of it. You can reverse engineer by taking taking a black square and covering up, so for a graph, you cover up the data to start with. So you just see the axes, and you introduce whatever it is you're going to show and explain. And then when you're ready, click, and you get rid of the black box that you put on it. And that is the same thing as drawing the line. But if you don't have, sometimes it's like from a paper or something, it's all set up already. You can cover up parts you don't want to show initially. Or you can cover up, well, I mean, I see scientists put up these graphs that come from papers, and and it's like there's a caption that's a paragraph size, like 0.8 font or whatever, and there's 4 footnotes, and the audience is like all over the place. So, but you have to beware of what I call animation mania, because there are all sorts of things that you can make these. The software has all these effects, and they're incredibly distracting. I mean, why we need our words to go up in flames, I don't exactly know. I once saw a presentation with a guy. What am I doing right now? I'm telling a story. And as soon as I start, did you notice? So I once saw this guy, right? It's an unconscious signal that you can relax. I'm about to tell you something. So anyways, this guy had mastered one animation, bringing stuff in from the right, and it would go really slow. By the 4th slide, everyone was like, no, don't change the slides again, because here it comes again. Boom, boom, boom. That was all people were just like looking at each other kind of in hysterics about this. He completely undermined his ability to make the points he wanted to make. I think that simple is better. I often will wipe left to right, but maybe that's because I grew up with a teacher writing in white chalk on the blackboard. I'm not sure, but I would encourage you to keep your animations simple and use them just when you need to, and don't get too enamored by some of the crazy stuff. I mean, my father-in-law was a fire chief. Maybe he could have had flaming letters in his presentation. But the other thing that's really, really important is that as a presenter, you don't have to look at what people are looking at on the screen. All the software, I'm using Keynote for the Macintosh here. Same thing is true in PowerPoint. There's something called presenter view. Okay, so what I'm looking at right now is not what you're looking at. What I'm looking at looks like this. I have the current slide, the next slide, I have the elapsed time, and I've got my notes. See, this is the eye contact one. Remember Sir Lancelot, lawn sprinkler? It says here, tell story of guy mad about nuclear power, right? So I have my notes there, and I can see what's coming. This really allows you then to introduce the next slide before you talk. You'll see people who aren't using presenter view because they'll switch slide and they'll say, oh yeah, and then they'll switch it back to the previous one and then introduce it. It makes it very, very easy. I also have a slide that I use in every presentation that I give, sometimes more than once. And you're looking at it. It's a black screen. Because when the screen is black, you don't have any choice but to listen to me, right? But you also know I'm not going to leave it black forever. I'm going to show you something eventually. So it's a way of keeping you engaged. You notice when I gave my opening statement, I gave a black screen. I have now started making sure to tell my host that when the screen goes black, don't worry about it. Several times I've been giving my opening statement, and I'm getting everybody engaged, and suddenly there's all this rustling around on this behind me, and the host is checking all the connections because they think that the thing is, because it's so rare that people do that.
Or the lights go up.
Well, right, but they know they can't do that, but they're hunting around, looking at my computer, and of course everyone is now looking at this guy running around, and I've completely lost I'm trying to get them all engaged in my opening statement. So then you always need to have a backup plan, okay? Bring your presentation on some kind of backup, or even have something written in case the power goes out or the projector breaks. I have my own projector. It's in my car in case nothing worked. And I got here a half an hour beforehand and futzed around and moved the projector and everything. So, when you go to a presentation and the presenter is like, oh, I don't know, this isn't working, or, sorry, I guess the projector is like, really? What's the point here? Or if you've paid at a professional conference and someone does that, it's like, oh, give me a break, So it shows respect for the audience that you have got everything together. So, a good presentation has 5 components. The topic, know what you're talking about. The opening statement, tell people why they should listen to you, not what you're going to talk about. The main points, not too many of them. A concise summary, like what's happening here. And then your closing statement. A good presenter projects emotion and passion, controls his or her voice, makes one-on-one eye contact, and speaks with confidence. Controls logistics, and she has a backup plan. The software complements words with pictures, controls the flow of information, doesn't overdo it with effects, and lets you use presenter view. So I think good presentations are a vitally important part of our work for CCL and for your work in whatever you do in your professional life. And the fact is that we have come to hold the bar so low for presentations that you can look like an absolute Olympian if you just practice a few of these techniques. But you've got to go for it. If you say, oh, I'm too shy, or I can never do that, I promise you, you won't. So, but it does take more time. I'm telling you to do something that's going to take a little more time, but the feedback is really going to be clear. It's really great. I used to say, but you have to practice. I used to say that one of the foremost experts on climate change in the Bay Area is my dog, because he hears my presentation more than anybody else. And in fact, we had this bed, and he would always snore when in this bed. So I'd bring this bed in with me and get him down in it, and at some point in the middle of my practicing, he'd start snoring, which was really great practice on being distracted. Speaking is not an acquired skill. All of you guys know how to talk, but public speaking is an acquired skill. And if you practice some of these techniques and concepts, I promise you, your work's going to be more effective. It's going to lead to more people understanding that climate change is an issue and that CCL has a really great idea to contribute to the solutions. So I hope you'll take this and practice it, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Yeah.
I have given lots of presentations on climate change, and one of the things that when you showed the thing about Al Gore, I thought, oh, maybe he'll know. I was trying so hard to find that wonderful footage that he came up with in his most recent Inconvenient sequel, when he's in Greenland, and then the very next shot is he's in Miami Beach with the water up to here. And because someone in the, Greenland said, Gore, where does all this water go? So I'm not asking you so much about the skill itself, but just do you know where I could get that
Well,
piece?
are you involved with the Climate Reality Project?
No, but I know people who
Okay,
are.
so you can, as a climate reality leader, I think is what they're called now, you can go online and download his latest slide deck.
It's all there.
Oh, okay.
And so it's there. And as long as you are not using it to make money, I don't think they'll have any trouble. I mean, actually, a couple of the slides, are that I still use, like the one of the continents moving together. They're actually the property of Paramount Pictures. But as long as I'm not making money off it, they don't care. So that's what I would suggest.
What if you're using it in an educational facility that, isn't particularly...
But are they going to come hunt you down? No. I wouldn't worry about it too much, but check with them.